Welcome back. Following today's classified briefing, some senators sounded reassured that the latest object shot down did not pose a threat to the country.
I am not in any way afraid that we are under a threat of attack or physical harm to our homeland.
I'm not any more concerned than I was before in terms of America's vulnerabilities.
It was clear there was these objects posed no threat to civilian or other population entities.
Despite the reassurance, the discovery of the aerial objects has raised fresh questions of how aware we are of what's flying in U.S. airspace, and it's prompted other countries to examine their own airspace as well. Japan says it now assesses Chinese surveillance balloons likely entered its airspace at least 3 times in recent years. Joining me now is retired Canadian Air Force Major General and former Director of Operations at NORAD, Scott Clancy. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to start right there with what we heard from the senators who said that based on the briefing that they just received today, the 3 objects that were shot down over U.S. airspace over the weekend did not pose a threat. They are being described as benign commercial or research objects. What do you make of that assessment and how quickly the objects were shot down?
So, yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think from the very beginning, whether it's Secretary Austin, whether it's the Canadian Minister of National Defense or General Vennert, the commander of NORAD, that these objects did not pose an immediate military threat to both Canada and the United States was clear. I think the same determination was made about the Chinese spy balloon on the front end of it as well, that these don't pose a specific threat. That doesn't mean that they're not intelligence gathering devices. And I haven't seen any specific reports that have said that these are commercial in nature either. So, that's kind of where I am with this. Now, the second thing that you asked there was about the speed or rapidity with which that these were brought down. I think, and I know because, when I was Director of Operations in NORAD, this was my job, that each one of these tracks is dealt with discreetly and specifically on its own merits. Now, they seem to have been coalescing together, that each and every one of them, the predominant factor that was at play here was that they were a threat to civil aviation, a hazard to civil aviation, and that became the rationale to bring them down. The only other thing that I would caution is that these 3 were not all brought down, under the authority of the American administration. 2 were. Alaska and Huron, but the other one was under the authorities of the Canadian National Sovereign Authorities.
That's a really important point. Just to follow up with you on that, because the administration has gotten some criticism that it brought down the 2 and then the one that was requested by authorities in Canada as quickly as it did because of the criticism that it got for not bringing down the Chinese spy balloon more quickly. What do you make of that criticism? How should we think about that piece of it?
That doesn't ring true to me because, I work inside of the enterprise in the past that did this. So, if we walk through perhaps how an engagement occurs. So the track, would come up on a radar screen somewhere. It would be cued by intelligence. Aircraft would be launched to go and identify exactly what that is. Those pilots would be out there looking and seeing and then using the systems on board their aircraft to figure out whether that's a civilian aircraft. Because all they would know before that is it's a track on a radar. They would see that it's a balloon. Okay, they would look at its characteristics and airspeed and configuration and take pictures. If it was an aircraft, they'd figure out compliance. But all of this would be transmitted back to NORAD headquarters. And then NORAD would be characterizing or describing this to the authorities in both Washington and Ottawa.
So just to put a fine point on this, were there unidentified objects that were identified during your time at NORAD? And were any of them brought down or shot down? Or brought down in any other way?
No. So this, as has been said, it's a momentous occasion. This is the first time that kinetic action has been taken by NORAD against any tracks in Canada and the United States. However, have we launched aircraft on tracks? Absolutely. The idea here is that a radar, gives you a track. You may or may not have any intelligence that cues you to what that is, at which point in time you launch aircraft to clarify that.
Does NORAD have the resources it needs moving forward? And what are the key unanswered questions that you want the answers to?
So the first part to that is NORAD modernization, continental defense are priorities in both the Department of Defense in the States budgets, as well as the Department of National Defense and the key armed forces in the North. We have to proceed very quickly here because, and one of the reasons why I think the senators in their briefing today are no more concerned before as after is they have a good sense to just how much we've allowed the NORAD enterprise, to its technology to fester. The idea, however, is that the binational agreement and the effective command and control of it has served us very, very well. So I think that's the primary thing. Mm-hmm. Concerned then, we're not any more concerned than we were, a few weeks ago.
Okay. Retired Major General Scott Clancy, thank you so much for your great information today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.